Hello there, welcome to the Path to Mindset Mastery. My name is Brad Bishak. I'm a mindset strategist and coach, inspirational speaker, and creator of Appreciation Academy. And I just want to take a minute to say Happy New Year. I hope you're having an amazing start to the new year, that things are going and rocking and rolling already, that you're seeing the growth that you want, that you set some amazing goals. And my job today is to help you get there. That's what I do. I teach business owners how to be truly fulfilled and happy on the way to success, so success happens so much faster. Happiness comes first. And the reason I'm here today is because I want to bring you an episode through a metaphor. You probably saw the title of this episode and you were like, what the hell is going on? But I wanted to bring you an episode today that was all about a metaphor that I learned from one of my best friends in the world. His name's Jim Wall. Okay, so everything on the podcast episode today, I did not create. This is something that I heard from Jim, so all the credit goes to Jim here. But it's so powerful, and it's all about lessons of a hermit crab. And this metaphor will allow you to see where you're at in your life right now and how to expand to the next level. Because I'm guessing you want this new decade to be one of the best decades of your entire life. You want to see so much growth. You want to see so much contribution. You want to quadruple, 5x your income, 10x your income. You want to do all these amazing things. And guess what? To do that, it's going to require an amazing, tremendous amount of personal growth. A level that you've never done before. A level that's going to make you feel totally vulnerable, totally scared to go after it. And that's why I wanted to start the year off with lessons of a hermit crab from my dear friend Jim Wall. So let's just dive right into this metaphor. This will make more sense in a second, but have you ever wondered what hermit crabs can teach you about growth? Hermit crabs are one of the few creatures who consistently change their shells throughout their life. And the reason is because as hermit crabs grow, they feel the pressure in their shell like getting too tight on them. And they feel it too tight, so they fill up their shell, and so they need to go and find a bigger shell as they go through life. It's a craving to be more. That's what a hermit crab has, just like you have right now in your life. You have a craving to be more, to give more, to have more, to share more, don't you? So when you have this need to give more, what's really happening is you are that hermit crab, and you're growing to the point where you're hitting that barrier of your shell, and it's starting to get uncomfortable, right? You're starting to get sick of your shell. You'll need to go through these periods of intense vulnerability where you ditch your current shell, your ego, that thing that's keeping you safe, and expose you for who you really are. So many people try to build a business and they try to do it without exposing what's actually going on in their life. They try to build a business without sharing what their true struggles are or where they've been. And when you live that way, you're never going to make an impact the way that you want. So the challenge with this, though, is that when you leave your current shell, you're exposed to all the sharks and the barracudas and the dangerous fish in the ocean, right? So when you hit this point, you have a couple of options. Choice one is to stay in your really tight shell in 2020, right? To get nowhere, to not go out of your comfort zone, to be protected by that shell and feel like you're too big for this shell. Or option two is to risk it all, to assume a new identity, or a new shell, right? And to know that when you're in the process of changing shells into a more beautiful, bigger one, you're going to be exposed. Because when you grow, and that's what will be required for 2020 to be the best year of your life, your shell is going to become too tight. And when you leave your shell, you're vulnerable, right? And the group of people with the same size shell as you are going to get really, really, really nervous that you're leaving that shell. They don't want you to change shells. They're afraid that if you change shells, you won't love them anymore because they're in a smaller shell and you're in a bigger, more pretty shell, right? And that very well could be the case. You could outgrow someone, but they want to cling to you and keep you in your shell where they feel like you'll want to be with them because you're similar. And they might be worried because in the past, when people they loved changed their shells, they no longer wanted them. So they're terrified. But a great friend or a great partner, and this is something to ask yourself if you're doing for the people around you, a great friend and a great partner embrace their partner or their friend's desire to grow because they focus on the true crab on the inside and believing in their potential. So if you support and encourage your partner or friend during their time of vulnerability, they'll get into a new, bigger shell and see you and love you even more, even though they might look a little bit different in their new shell. They're going to love you through that, but if you resist them changing, that's what happens. Same thing with your partner resisting you changing. So when you go through these periods of intense vulnerability and you grow and you change into your new shell, part of you is going to look different, right? You might carry yourself a little bit taller. You might have new opportunities, right? You might have new shell friends, new big shell friends that you've met. So you'll have a new shell keeping you safe, but deep down, either way, before we go into this, you're still the same person on the inside. You're just more evolved. You're just growing and expanding your shell. Does that make sense? So you need to be around people. If 2020 is going to be the best year of your life, you need to be around people that support you during these periods of change. That way they watch your back against the sharks and the barracudas and the eels or whatever the hell is eating the hermit crabs, right? You want people that cover your back when you're in the process of changing shells and accepting the new shells of their friend and partner, you, right? So this is where faith and trust comes in for you. Because if you are growing and changing, you need to trust that you're going to love other people along the way, and your friends and people close to you need to trust that you're still going to love them. Because if you or your partner don't support the other in changing to their new shell, then the person changing shells is going to feel hurt. And if that happens, it's like a dagger in the heart, because if your spouse hurts you at your most vulnerable time during your shell change, you don't have the protection of the new shell, so it hurts even more. So the crab that's changing can either keep changing and trying to inspire their partner even though they feel the pain, or they can go back into the old shell. Are you following the metaphor so far? And the latter is a worse choice. Going back into the old shell is a worse choice, because you end up staying in your shell, and the whole life that you have, there's all this pressure built up because you could have expanded shells, but you didn't. Like, have you ever been at a bar and you've seen those old guys talking about their wife, like the old ball and chain, keeping them stuck, like complaining about their wives? And it might be a joke, but deep down there's a more serious issue there. It's because their whole life they've refused to change shells because they've been afraid that their wife has criticized them when they've changed shells, so they've gone back into that shell. So let's be real. Why don't people leave their safe shells to grow and change? Why don't you, the hermit crab, I can't believe I'm calling you a hermit crab, why don't you, the hermit crab, leave your shell to grow and change? Well, it's really simple. One, spousal and family pressure that it's not cool to change shells. That's the first reason, spousal and family pressure that's not cool to change shells. Two, self-confidence that you have what it takes to find a new shell. Three, lack of trust in either friends or spouse or family to support you during that vulnerable phase. Four, feeling undeserving of a new shell. And five, even using food or alcohol or sex addiction or pills to numb the pain of a tight shell. So they don't even realize they need to change. And this is why people don't change, because eventually at some point, our desire to grow can atrophy and we'll shrink back into our old shell and be at that barrier mark. And it doesn't hurt as bad, so we stay there. Plus, remember that it's so much easier to justify staying in that shell when you're hanging out with other people that have also decided to stay in their shell. Because guess what? Misery loves company, right? It's a cliche for a reason. And here's the thing. If crabs had doctors, they'd never grow into new shells. They'd never grow into new shells. Why? Because when humans experience the pain of growing, right, they hit that outer shell. They might go to a doctor and get treated because they're feeling anxious because they're so closed off and claustrophobic in their new shell. Or they might get depressed that they have no more room for growth from being in their current shell. So they'll go to a doctor and talk about these problems, and they'll get medication to make the symptoms of anxiety and depression get better. But all this does is keep them in their shell because it numbs them to the pain of growth. And then they put a label on it. You suffer from X, so you can't leave that shell and grow and change. The crab physician might have the intention of keeping you around as a patient, or maybe they only have a certain number of skills to try and serve someone. So the physician might focus on the symptoms they're experiencing when deep down, the crab just wants to grow into a new shell. So those pills, this is why if you see someone that's depressed and taking or someone that's on antidepressants but they're still depressed, this is kind of why, right? Again, not saying there's not some people that have it worse than others. That's not what I'm saying at all. Very real thing. But I'm saying that it numbs us from changing. It numbs the symptoms instead of allowing for true growth. So think about addiction. Oftentimes with addiction, we treat the symptoms instead of unraveling the source of it. And in a lot of cases, it might just be someone who wants to get into a new shell. Not all cases, but some, right? So the reason we choose a new shell is because it's stronger. It's stronger in the places the old shell you had was weak. This is why you want to grow. You want to become stronger. The new shell gives you more power to deal with the old problems you used to face. That's what a new shell does. I can handle things in my life now that super easily that would have taken me so much effort before that I can't even explain. It's like I do things in my sleep now that would have taken me weeks before, right? This is why you want to upgrade the shells to begin with, though, right? You want to have strength to deal with those problems so it's not as big of a problem. But the new shell that you're growing into, that you're going to need to grow into in 2020, will also have new challenges. It's also going to have weak points that you didn't realize before. And so eventually, even though you grow, you're going to need to grow again because you're going to realize that there are weak points on your current shell. The point is that we're always meant to be growing. And the pain of growing is good. Because if you avoid the pain of growing, you'll stay stuck in that tight-ass shell. And you'll either resent life or use medication to numb the pain of growth. So you always need to be seeking out new shells on a constant basis. It's never perfection. We need to be okay. As you go into 2020, you need to be okay facing new challenges. There's no such thing as a perfect shell where you have it all figured out. And if you spend your time waiting for the perfect new shell to come around, you're going to miss out on all the growth you could be experiencing in the meantime. So my point with all of this is life is about changing shells, being vulnerable, surrounding yourself with other shell changers who get your back during the vulnerable times. In fact, you should even pay for a crab shell change coach, right? Why should you pay for a coach? Because they can see your shell. They're trained to see your shell from the outside, maybe the backside of your shell that you can't see, your blind spots, to point out the vulnerabilities where you can grow even more that you might not even notice in your shell. So if you surround yourself with other shell changers and take turns getting each other's backs during each other's shell changes, you'll have an amazing life because you're always growing and learning together. And you'll learn how to appreciate the shell that you're in that right now before you grow, but always keeping an eye out for newer, better shells. Life is about sharing your shell changing stories with others to inspire them to find a new shell. At the same time as this, you never want to tell someone they have an ugly shell. Remember, they picked that shell. So what you want to do is share your experience changing shells, vulnerability, listen to these other people, coach them, share the pains of you changing your shells, and help their squishy self on the inside realize that they want to change into a bigger shell. If you tell someone they need to change, what does it do? They resent you, they hold back, and their shell will deflect it, just like a shell is designed to do. They're designed to protect you. So by judging someone else's shell, their shell will protect them, and it may end up being they might even end up being more dependent on their shell for protection, so they're more scared to go and grow and be vulnerable. So as we go through this metaphor, please realize a couple of things. One, your shell is your ego. That's what your shell is, your ego. And two, the inside squishy crab is your true identity, okay? And as that identity expands, you need to find a new shell that's a bigger ego, right? So the sole job of the ego is to protect what's inside, the identity, right? It literally doesn't know anything else. It's hard, it's rigid, it doesn't grow. A shell blocks and protects, but it serves a beautiful purpose. Because if you never had any protection, you'd get eaten alive. But just as it keeps out the danger, it also keeps out the growth. So we have our inner identity, but that identity loves to use openings in the shell to consume knowledge and to grow. And once you're ready to grow, the ego says, hell no, slow down. You're not leaving the shell because the people you love won't recognize you anymore. And you pair that with outside pressure of other people wanting you to stay in the same shell so they're not afraid that you're going to leave them. It's actually really, really easy to never grow and change. This is why 98% of the world doesn't expand and grow and change, because it's really easy not to because they live in that shell. But it's also in these crucial periods of opening up your vulnerability, your vulnerable, squishy identity to the outside world, that's when you absorb the most. It's scary, but that's where exponential growth happens. When you're outside the shell, outside the ego, that's where the game changes. It's scary, but we can't live outside the ego forever, so we find a bigger shell. And when you, the hermit crab, comes out of the shell to eat, to consume, to grow, you're exposed. It's the same way when we come outside of our ego to consume knowledge and go to seminars, invest in coaching, you're exposed too, right? So opening yourself up to learning and growing is a practice in releasing yourself from protection of the ego. That's what it is. You can't learn from the confines of your ego. You can't learn from the confines of your shell. I know everything, I'm not hungry, I'm going to stay in my shell. You can't grow from there. And by the way, this is how you hurt people. You hit them when they're outside the protection of their shell. People won't come out of their shell unless they trust you, right? You won't come out of your shell unless you trust someone else. That's why the people we love and trust the most are the ones that hurt us the worst. It's because around other people, we don't leave our shell and we're protected by our ego. But when we trust someone, we come out of our shell to explore new shells. So we're vulnerable and we trust that they're going to look out for us. But that's when the worst pain sometimes comes. Sometimes we're out of our shell and we get hit by something on the outside, right? Something else. It could be haters, whatever it is, and that can hurt. But that's when you need other crab friends to get your back. But that only kind of hurts. What hurts the most is when someone that was supposed to have your back hits you when you're out of that shell. That stings, man. That hurts. So relate this to couples. Like if you circle back to why couples kind of fail sometimes, it's because they don't change shells. Well, if one person in the couple grows and changes shells, it might cause a rift between them if the other doesn't, right? One might be scared of the other continuously changing shells and resisting them changing. Or they might be inspired and grow too and ask for support along their own shell change. These couples, these are the ones that are always growing, right? They're always having variety despite being together for a long time. So if you think about how can you be in a great marriage for 50, 60 years and still have passion? How is that possible? Because you keep supporting each other through shell changes, and you go first out of the shell, you poke your head around, go and find a new shell. You help the other person get out of their shell and you inspire them to grow. But if one person stays stuck and the other person grows, think it causes a rift? Absolutely. They'll always be the same squishy crab on the inside of the shell that you've always loved. But they're adding new variety, new strengths and weaknesses to work through as they grow and change shells. Plus, the process of always coming out to eat or learning and consuming is fun, especially when you do it together. So think of a tough scenario. Maybe, let's use this example. Maybe one person in the couple changes shells and the other does too, but they're diverting more and more and more in other directions. Or one is changing slowly and the other is on a shell hunting marathon, right? This isn't such a pleasant place to be, especially if they've already created crab babies, right? Crab babies, by the way, are extremely vulnerable. And they have small, really soft shells. We actually raise crab babies to grow and think shells should be strong and resist the dangers of the outside. But we might overlook the importance of teaching crab babies to frequently open up and grow and eat. We protect them so strongly when they're young, allowing them to be vulnerable and consume quickly and grow fast. They have no need to think a strong shell or ego is necessary because they're guarded by their parents and society. And this is why young people can hurt easily, because they don't really know why it hurts in the early years of their life. But this sustained vulnerability is why children grow so much faster than adults, because they spend less time under the protection of their parents and less time under protection of society and the ego, right? And soon their vulnerability becomes obvious. And they feel the pain caused by the outside world more and more. And maybe they're told to be tough, and maybe they're told that they shouldn't feel this pain, or they realize they need to protect themselves. Either way, that's when they start finding a shell, and they need a hard shell to protect themselves, and they grow. Their growth speed from vulnerability slows down because the energy is spent building a new shell around them, right? So the shell serves a purpose. It's okay, but it changes our life greatly. Because this is what happens in teenage years, right? They stop growing so much and they put up their ego around them so they don't grow as much. And so either the parents tell them to grow a shell, or a coach does, or a teacher does, or a friend does. But this is a key phase of life where we start to define ourselves. We define our shell, our ego, which also means that we're defining our limits. We figure out what our shell looks like, and we do this by whatever ways we can, by looking at the people around us that are building theirs. That's how we figure out how to build ours. We look at our role model parents, right? And maybe their shell, and maybe teachers and their shell, and we base how to design ours off of them. So we sometimes even feel like rushed to build these shells in an unnecessary way. We just feel that we turn to whatever example is there in our immediate surroundings. This is why positive role models why positive role models during these formative years are so freaking crucial. This is why people will say that if you don't influence your children when they need a role model the most, someone else will. They're not going to sit around waiting for you to show them a good way to build their shell. They're going to do the best they can with what they have. Does that make sense? So, as we mentioned, the shell protects. And once it's starting to form, we might actually feel kind of almost like we're proud of what we've done, what we built. And if parents weren't there to positively influence our shell building, this can also cause a rift between your parents and you, right? Maybe the teenage crab feels safe in their new shell, then maybe they might not want to come out for a little bit. And that's what happens. So with the shell comes security, but it also comes boundaries. And this is why we're always fluctuating between the balance of certainty and uncertainty, right? Tony Robbins talks about that. Every human being needs certainty, but they also need uncertainty. Like our shell is round, and we can't easily poke our eyes out to see the whole thing all the time. And some parts are easier to see. So when we go about spotting weak spots on our shell and patching them and finding new shells that are stronger in that area, we're often strengthening only a part of us. So how do we know if we have a spot on the other side that could use opening or improvement? Well, really simple. This is where a crab coach comes in. This is where joining that course comes in, going to that seminar comes in. This is where a loved one calling you out comes in. Because you need to get to that point where you have people in your life saying, hey man, my hallucination is that weak part in your shell might be opening you up for some vulnerability. You might want to find a better shell, grow and change to get into a better shell to help protect that. And when you're surrounded by all those people that do this, it's a beautiful feeling. It's amazing. It allows you to feel free and safe to go outside of that shell and grow. But this is why it's so important to bring on people into your life that allow you to do this. But ultimately, that's the way to solve blind spots in your life. With a bunch of other people, all in our shells, we need to grow. And what happens with this is the leader tends to emerge, right? So there's a leader in our life that draws us out from our shells. You've had someone in your life that has been impactful for you. They are someone that has gone through shell changes themselves, and they've drawn you out of your shell, right? Quite frankly, by banging on your shell or tapping on the weak spots, telling you, hey man, you should come out. This isn't going to be good here. And when that happens, you leave your shell, you look back at it, and you can actually start to see the vulnerable weak spots. So the goal of you as the leader is to keep growing in your shells to get one more person to come out and then another person to come out. And that's where story comes in. When you share your shell-changing story of your courage to be vulnerable, that's what allows other crabs to come out of their shell. Does that make sense? So the whole point of all of this, reeling this back in again, what's this all about? This is about bringing self-awareness to a necessary shell upgrade. Having the courage to step into a new shell. It's 2020. This is where if you want this new decade to be a game changer in life, if you really want that to happen, you can't stay in the confines of your shell. You'll need to grow. And it's okay to ask for support when you do this. It's okay to do that, but you need to be the one to choose to step out. No one's going to do it for you. You need to pick one that looks like the type of shell that you want to be around, right? If you're attracted to a group of people, let's say you have people that are crushing it in life, say, what does their shell look like? And start to look for shells that are like that and find opportunities to build your strength to maintain a shell like that. That's where the game will change. When you do this, when you grow, your existing friends might not recognize you. And that's okay. Because they're like, wait, why are you growing? But they still love the squishy you on the inside. And the good friends, the true friends, will celebrate you regardless of what your shell looks like. Some other people might have a harder time relating to you. And that's okay if they're not part of your tribe, go forward. But you need to stay consistent in finding a new shell, being always open to grow, and the right crabs will stick around. Does that make sense? And when you do this consistently, you reach a beautiful point where you become the shell leader. And this is where you, through your vulnerability, you inspire other crabs to peek their heads out and try something new. You challenge other crabs. You support them during their shell changing season. You become the leader crab. Does that make sense? So a lot of us want to have a massive, bright, beautiful shell, right? Have all the bells and whistles of life. We want that. And it's beautiful to aspire to that. And we'll be able to get there. But it will only happen if you're willing to be vulnerable and continue to change shells. When you do that, you'll become an inspiration for those who need a shell change themselves, and that includes your intimate relationships as well. All of this to say is that 2020 is here. you're going to need to do something courageous, something big, something different that inspires you to get out of that shell. Do something new to challenge what you've always known. And so I always tell my clients this: if it feels not okay in your heart and it's scary, it's probably not a good fit. If it feels right in your heart and it's terrifying, then it's probably an amazing fit. And if it feels right in your heart but it's not scary, it's a sign to play bigger. It's a sign to play bigger. So take an analysis. What do you need to do in 2020 to grow and expand your shell? What do you need to do to get to another level in your life? By saying, you know what? Feeling the pressure of this shell builds up all around me. It's time that I expand this. Knowing it's not bad to have an ego. Everyone has an ego. That ego can only serve you for so long. When your identity expands and you consume more, it can only be consumed outside of that shell. And when you do this, the game changes forever. This is how I've gone from where I was in my life to where I am now. From expanding my identity and thus needing a bigger shell to protect me along the way. So I hope you got a lot out of this. Credit goes to Jim Wall, one of my best friends in the world. He taught me this metaphor, and he can probably explain it way better than I can. But I thought this metaphor was really, really impactful. And it's something that you can use to change your life, go forward. And it's just lessons that we can learn from hermit crabs. So one of the things that I like to do real quick, I'm going to be doing a drawing for a Amazon gift card. If you head to my iTunes right now, give me a rating and review on iTunes right now, a star rating and a written review, and then shoot over an email to brad@bradbizjack.com. If you go ahead and do that today, you'll be entered into a drawing to win an Amazon gift card, and I will make sure and do that later on this week. So go ahead and to iTunes and give a rating and review. Send me an email at brad@bradbizjack.com. But either way, thank you so much for tuning in today. I'd love to hear what your biggest takeaways were from this metaphor in life. How can you use this to change your life, go forward? So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening to the Path to Mindset Mastery. My name is Brad Bizjack. Credit goes to Jim Wall today. But either way, go out there today and every day and live your life with a genuine smile on your face, just like a growing hermit crab would do. I'll see you next week.